Hello there, good evening to you. Isn't it a lovely evening tonight? And I really appreciate you joining me. I've got such a lovely Bigfoot story for you tonight, all from the Alaskan Triangle, where so many mysterious things happen there. There have been reports of very strange and unusual animal sightings, people who've seen UFOs and heard all kinds of, supernatural stories out there, including, of course, Bigfoot. And that's our favourite subject. So let's get started. I hope you enjoyed the story, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I've got some amazing new stories coming up that you don't want to miss out on. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I have lived in Alaska all my life. We're talking about a place that is quite literally twice the size of Texas. My Alaska is 57 million acres of wilderness, of which so much has never been explored. It is a well-known fact among the locals that live here that 16,000 people have gone missing here. When I say missing, I mean no trace of the body was ever found or recovered. The person just vanished into thin air with no sight or sound of them ever heard again. I live in the Alaskan Triangle that has been considered the most formidable, dangerous and deadly, even more so than the Bermuda Triangle, and you are 3 times more likely to go missing here than from any other state in the whole of North America. At the first time of my Bigfoot encounter, I lived near the village of Sterling in southern Alaska, which is a very beautiful and remote part of the world, and I lived in a lovely cabin. My nearest neighbour was about 2 miles away from me, so that's how remote I really was. Before I tell you about my Bigfoot encounter, I want to tell you that Alaska is one of the most haunted places in North America. Stories abound in this part of the world about ghostly encounters, apparitions, alien abductions, wormholes, vortexes, including animal sightings of strange creatures that have never been documented by science. I personally believe that Bigfoot is one of those creatures. I built my cabin from scratch with my husband Bill, and no expense was spared in creating our beautiful wilderness home. I enjoy the remoteness of my life, as strange as that might sound to your listeners, and being cut off from the excesses of the material world is something I thrive on and relish. I love the raw realness of nature, and even the cruel hardness of life here has an incredible, formidable beauty about it. My husband spends his day trapping, and I am an artist spending time painting the natural world, and in Alaska there is so much untapped beauty to paint. And many of my works are sold in Anchorage to tourists who want to take a piece of Alaska back home with them. One day I was going berry picking close to my home in summer, and I felt certain I was being watched by something. I had never felt this level of fear before, because I sensed that a predator had its eyes on me. Nothing is more frustrating in this entire world than being unable to see the thing that is stalking you, and that was my situation. Every time I moved, this thing would move, and when I stopped, it would stop too. I was troubled by this experience because I could tell that the thing that was stalking me was bipedal. It was definitely walking on 2 feet, and whatever it was, it stunk. There are lots of smells I'm familiar with in Alaska, but this smell was different, and it was nasty, with a sulphurous skunk overtone. I have no other way to describe it, so I won't even begin to try. I immediately raised my rifle and looked through the scope to see if I could see anything. The only thing I can say is that I caught a brief sighting of this large, big black mass, almost floating past me like an apparition. It happened so quickly, and then it was gone. Whatever it was, I knew it had gone, but I was left wondering what on earth I had seen. And I was so freaked out that I returned to the cabin in haste. That night my husband was not at home because he was staying in Anchorage with his parents, as his mother was poorly at the time and he wanted to help out his dad in taking care of his mum. I made a fire, cooked dinner, and curled up on the sofa to read a book. Before long, I had fallen asleep, and I was awoken to the sounds of wood knocks all around my cabin, and the sounds were frightening because I could hear this heavy breathing and the occasional grunt. My thoughts returned to my berry picking earlier in the day. Had the creature who'd been stalking me followed me home? And if so, how great a threat was this animal? What was it, I wondered? People think that if you live off-grid in the Alaskan wilderness, you must be brave. But that is one thing that I am most certainly not. Suddenly I felt terribly alone and incredibly vulnerable in my cabin. I really wanted to contact my husband immediately and beg him to come home, but I just could not do it. I knew I needed to deal with my fear and overcome it, and there was no time like the present. And I also knew that my husband needed to be with his dad to look after his mother. Luckily, after a while, all was quiet, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I walked outside my cabin and fired some warning shots outside to make sure that I would truly scare that creature off, whatever it was. Suddenly, from behind a large tree, I saw a figure literally floating towards me with the stealth of a cheetah and the fluidity of a ghost, although I've never seen one, but that's how I imagine a ghost would appear. In the darkness, this creature was formidable. The red eye shine was truly haunting, and against the darkness of the night, those eyes glowed like red-hot coals of fire. I had never seen such a large black mass in the night shadows before. You really could be forgiving for believing you were seeing something paranormal, but this creature was as real in its life force as you and I are, and he was without doubt incredibly dangerous. He snarled at me, curling up his lips, and I realized that my gunshots had done nothing to scare him, but in fact they had provoked him to such anger, and I knew by the way that he looked at me, he was going to kill me without a shadow of a doubt. I'm ashamed to say that my fear completely paralyzed me. You would think that with my hunting background, growing up in the Alaskan wilderness, that I would have my rifle on the ready, but instead I realized that it had fallen on the ground out of my hands in a moment of agonizing fear. I can only tell you this, I was frozen to the spot. Forget what they tell you about the adrenaline surge causing you to run for your life in moments of terror. Nothing could be further from the truth in my case. I felt like a rusty old piece of iron that had not been oiled in hundreds of years and was way too heavy to move. My legs felt so heavy and my body so tight, with such a fear that was so palpable that I just stood there waiting to face what was coming. And by the look of the creature, death was beckoning at my door. The creature lunged towards me and threw me into his arms, and I found myself being carried on his shoulders at lightning speed. But then I suddenly heard gunshots. My husband was standing there with a rifle in his hands, and he was firing shots at the creature, and his jaw was hanging open with horror at what he was witnessing. It seemed that my husband fired at the creature, and the bullets just almost ricocheted and bounced off him, almost as if he really was supernatural, because it failed to touch him. Finally, one of the shots did hit the creature in his large, muscular arm, and I saw blood squirting out of his body. He threw me to the ground, and luckily I landed on a pile of leaf litter, and so was miraculously unhurt. But then I saw the creature in anger lunging towards my husband, who immediately let out a few more rounds of bullets at the creature. Once one got caught on his leg, and again I saw blood oozing out of the wound. Despite the creature's mammoth size, the gunshot to the leg really sealed the deal, and the creature ran off whimpering like a puppy who had been reprimanded. I'll never forget that whimpering sound. It was pathetic for a creature as massive and as huge as that. I was astonished. I could not believe my husband had come back home in the nick of time when he was supposed to be in Anchorage with his parents. He said that when he was with his dad, he heard a voice telling him that your wife is in danger, and he wasted no time in obeying that voice. I told you things are weird out here in Alaska, and that the paranormal is a constant in this part of the world. There's so many experiences I could tell you about that I have no explanation for. Something or someone told my husband to return home quickly, and he said the voice was so real and so authoritative and so commanding that he really believed it to be true. But when he saw the creature carrying me on his shoulders, it was the most horrifying scene he had ever witnessed in his entire life. Being an artist, I naturally drew the creature, and my husband said it was an incredible likeness. The trouble was that in the darkness of the night, with only the light from my cabin, it was difficult to see him clearly enough to get down all those details. But I know without a doubt that we saw a Bigfoot that night. All I remember is his nasty odor, which was the smell I had noted when I was berry picking earlier on in the day. I also know he had much longer arms than we do, very long, dense black hair, which I believe was the carrier of the nasty stench. His eyes were huge at night, but possibly a lot smaller during the day because of the effects that eye shine can create. It does tend to make eyes look a lot bigger at night. His face had human and ape-like features that were married together, and as for height, he was about 10 foot in stature and 10 feet in width, and that's no exaggeration. But I promise you, in Alaska, all the animals are always bigger. So maybe Bigfoot is too. Weeks passed without incident, and then one day we came home to find our cabin completely trashed from top to bottom, and there was nothing left of all the hard work that we had put into creating our dream home. As I walked around the damage, I could smell the telltale nasty odor of that rank creature, so I knew without a doubt who the culprit was, and he had come back to wreak revenge on us. He wanted to show us in no uncertain terms that he was boss. My husband and I got the message very, very quickly, and we wasted no time in moving away to Fairbanks in Alaska and building ourselves a beautiful new home, but not nearly as remote. I do feel safer in my new abode because at least I'm far away from that creature that terrorized me that night. I do believe he was not really harmed by those bullets because of his massive size. So if you're in any doubt about Bigfoot, one thing I know for sure, there are creatures like him wandering around our wilderness here in Alaska. And who knows, they may account for all the missing cases that happen in the Triangle year after year. I know my husband would be one of those people today wondering on earth what had happened to me, but luckily he got home in time to save my life. I have no idea what this creature's intention was with me, but I am sure of one thing. I would ultimately have ended up on his dinner table. I hope you enjoyed my story. That was an incredible encounter. Thank you so very much. And don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, good night.